Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Kabul by Javid Faisal. He's the deputy spokesman to Afghanistan's chief executive. And from Washington, Omar Samad. He's a former ambassador and a former spokesman for the Afghan Foreign Ministry. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Javid Faisal, let me start with you. Daesh, in some respects, makes the Taliban look quite tame by comparison. Is Daesh your fundamental threat in the country right now?
I believe Taliban remain to be the biggest threat to security in Afghanistan. Daesh is something strange to Afghanistan. They are not having the same culture or respecting the same culture that Afghans do. Their religious beliefs are different than the ones of Afghanistan. They have not been able to gain the respect and attention of the people that other terrorist groups or mainly Taliban have had in the past. So we here believe that Taliban remain to be the main threat to Afghanistan, not Daesh, because in the past 2 or about 3 years we were able to take care of them in the areas where they were able to gain ground.
Okay,
not
but you
anymore.
say that, but
past years,
if it allow me to come in there, right? You say you're taking care of them where they can gain ground. A year ago, the US military said there are 700 fighters. Now, just at the end of last year, the top NATO commander said that they had killed 1,600 fighters. It doesn't add up. If there were only 7, why were 1,600 killed? And now at the moment, these guys continue to conduct attacks on Shia mosques, cultural centers, shrines, you name it. Sunni, Shia, unbelievers to them, whoever, right? So the fact that you're saying that you're taking care of them, it seems as if we don't even know the numbers, and it also seems as if they're willing and capable of attacking with impunity.
The main problem with the numbers is that it's not only Daesh. As we have been saying, we are fighting 20 terrorist groups in Afghanistan. There are other groups who have joined Daesh. There are drug mafia who are supporting Daesh or somehow are being called part of Daesh. There are groups from Pakistan-based terrorist groups who are fighting under Daesh in Afghanistan. That's why you cannot say. But we have been killing them. We have been using all our force against them. There is no ground for them. There is no space for them among the people. And they have not been able to have footprints in areas more than they were there before. They were somehow in 7 provinces in Afghanistan before, but today they are only in 4 provinces of Afghanistan.
Okay, so let's take that and pose it to Omar Samad.
In there, they are supported by Taliban.
Okay, fair enough. So we have Omar Samad, we have Javid Faisal saying, we're beating them, we're killing them, and we're containing them. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think on one hand, that is what the Afghan forces and their allies have been doing over the past couple of years or so. But on the other hand, I believe that Daesh, as we call it in Afghanistan, it's called IS or Daesh Khorasan province, and it's sort of split into 2 distinct groups for the moment, and it might change. It's an evolving situation, an emerging situation in Afghanistan, that they are also, in my opinion, looking at Afghanistan as an opportunity, as a space that they could occupy wherever there's a vacuum. And what we see are those who have raised the Daesh flag, who belong to the region, to the closer region to Afghanistan, mainly former Pakistan Taliban, some members of maybe former Taliban themselves, Afghan Taliban, who are more radicalized and have, for whatever reason, joined this Daesh KP. But also what we see are enclaves of Daesh who are foreign fighters coming from faraway places such as the Middle East, Central Asia, Caucasus, and other places, including Chinese Uyghur fighters who have joined, Uzbek fighters who have joined this so-called Daesh. So we have these 2 phenomena,
we've seen this movie before, haven't we?
Emerging.
Ambassador Samad, we've seen this movie before. Foreign fighters given a safe haven in Afghanistan with global ambitions, not local ambitions like the local Taliban. Isn't that exactly what happened with Al-Qaeda and exactly what precipitated 9/11?
Well, I mean, yes, you can go back to the 80s and 90s and draw some analogies. There may be some analogies. The situation is very different. The players are different. Right now, you also have linkages to what I would call regional powers and rivalries that stretch from the Middle East all the way maybe to Ukraine and other hotspots where the Americans and the Russians are rivals, where India and Pakistan is rivals, where, for example, Iran and the West are rivals, and so on and so forth. So what Afghans are concerned about is that their territories would be again used by any group, any terrorist group, any radicalized group, whether you call it Daesh, whether you call it Taliban, whether you call it by any other name, for nefarious purposes and for destabilizing Afghanistan and using Afghanistan as a springboard or using Afghanistan as a sanctuary.
But
and I think that the Afghan government needs to do everything possible to prevent that from happening.
Do you make that distinction between the Taliban and Daesh? We heard Javid Faisal make it a little bit earlier on, saying it's difficult for them as Daesh to sort of take root in the society because they seem to be this kind of foreign export or foreign import, if you like. Do you make that distinction between the Taliban and Daesh?
So the Daesh brand that we see with those two different factions, as I explained earlier, do have some dissimilarities with Afghan Taliban, but it's part of a whole larger network, in my opinion. And I think that there are linkages at some levels, especially when they rely on foreign patronage. When they rely on foreign patronage, could it be money or arms or training or sanctuaries, then there is a possibility, as we saw with Daesh in eastern Afghanistan, having certain linkages with groups that are based in Pakistan. And we see that emerging. So we see also Daesh in northern Afghanistan with foreign fighters having linkages with maybe countries and maybe organizations and terrorist organizations and criminal organizations that stretch all the way to the Middle East.
Any countries in mind?
Well, I cannot pinpoint to a country, but I think that Afghanistan is a victim of a proxy war. And I think that this proxy war is waged mostly by so-called ghost organizations or intelligence organizations or deep state organizations that have certain objectives that have to be met. Now, the Russians and the Iranians say one thing. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that are being flown around. The Afghan government obviously has its own view of how things are. The Americans have their own view of how things are. The Pakistanis are now getting into this game and starting this blame game as well. And if you look at other countries beyond Afghanistan's borders, they each have a certain claim. And so what needs to be done is we need to all sort of agree on what kind of a threat Daesh Afghanistan or Daesh KP is to everyone, in which we can find commonality and work to make sure that it is eradicated.
Javid Faisal, talking about the international players involved, the Russians quite blatantly say that the Americans and the Afghan government downplay the threat of Daesh in your country. They're right, aren't they? You guys are downplaying it while Daesh is much stronger than you say.
I would not agree to what has been said by the Russians because we have been using all our force against Daesh. We have been fighting all terrorist outfits without any differentiations. Against Daesh, the United States used the biggest bomb ever, and that was a big example of our commitment to fighting against Daesh and all other terrorist outfits.
But that happened 1 year ago.
The countries in the region
and sorry to interrupt you, that happened 1 year ago, and that was supposed to have smashed them and destroyed them. They've only re-emerged stronger. Sergei Lavrov saying, according to our data, that's the Russian data, the IS presence or Daesh presence in northern and eastern Afghanistan is rather serious. There are already thousands of gunmen. And they say the US and NATO and Afghanistan makes every effort to silence and deny this presence. Doesn't he have a point?
I believe our information or the information given by the United States should be credible in information given by the Russians. We are here on the ground. We are fighting them on a daily basis. And we have not been differentiating. And if we come to the comparison, a year ago, they had the power to fight on the ground with our forces. But today, they do not have the force to fight against our forces on the ground. All they do is to carry out side attacks. All they do is to blow themselves up. among the busy locations in Afghanistan, and they are killing all innocent civilians. They no longer have the force to fight. So I believe they have become weaker than they were a year ago, and they will be destroyed here, they will be finished here, and there is no space for them, neither within the people, and neither within the system or within the government. We are fighting against them.
Omar
We are not
Samad.
differentiating between them.
Okay, so Omar Samad, we have the Americans. They dropped the mother of all bombs. They've sent in special forces. Their airstrikes killed 2 leaders of ISIS Khorasan, as they call them. We have all of this happening. And on the other hand, there's a conspiracy theory related to the Americans allowing Daesh to flourish. I didn't just get it from any old man on the street. It was from the former Afghan president himself who told me on this very program last year. Have a little listen to what Hamid Karzai had to say.
They kept watching it while the Afghan people kept coming to us and complaining of how Daesh was behaving and doing things.
So they knew, but they did nothing.
They not only knew, they watched. They cannot tell the Afghan people that they didn't know. The airspace is in their hands, the communication is in their hands, the area is under their complete, absolute surveillance. There is no way that they can excuse themselves or offer excuses in this regard. No, we don't believe it, and they are to blame.
Omar Samad, is Hamid Karzai just, I don't know, being polemical just for domestic purposes, or does he have a point that the United States allowed Daesh to flourish in Afghanistan over the past few years?
I am of the view that Hamid Karzai and a few others have their own opinion about this, which is not substantiated. I have not come across anything yet that shows that there is a conspiracy by the West or by the United States to impose Daesh for certain purposes against other countries. At the same time, we also need to make sure that other countries' claims have proof and evidence. We can't just continue with this game, which, as I said, is mostly a proxy geopolitical game, by making these kinds of allegations. We need hard proof. Now, what we do know so far, as I said, is that there is a Daesh presence in Afghanistan. There are 2 types of them, as I said, and that each has its own objectives, and they have their own networks that they are affiliated to. And so countries and those elements within countries that want to use Daesh for a certain purpose will obviously come up with a narrative. And so you have a war of narratives on Daesh brewing around Afghanistan. What needs to be done is we need to come on the same page. We need to find, as I said, a certain sense of what the threat perception is, what the threat reality is, and what needs to be done to get rid of Daesh, whether it's one type or the other type.
Understood.
And I think that it needs a lot of diplomacy, and it needs a little bit more engagement across the board. What I'm afraid of is that if something happens in the Ukraine, then Daesh Afghanistan, one brand or the other, is activated. Or something happens, let's say, between Iran or another country, or Russia and another country, then Afghanistan becomes a target or becomes a platform for waging this kind of war, and that has to stop.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, I've got to wrap. There's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty with regards Daesh in Afghanistan at the moment. I'll have to thank you both. I hope you'll both come back to the Newsmaker sometime soon. Omar Samad and Javid Faisal, thanks again.